We've got some more breaking news in right now. It appears as though the president of the United States, President Trump, has announced on Truth Social that he has signed the bill to release the Epstein files. There's the Truth Social post. This move by the president comes after the House and Senate passed the bill this week, sending it to the president's desk. He writes, perhaps the truth about these Democrats and their associations with Jeffrey Epstein will soon be revealed because I have just signed the bill to release the Epstein files. Now, again, it's something that we've been covering throughout the day. The timing has been a big question mark. It appears as though the president has signed it almost immediately after making its way to the desk. We saw that that bill passed the House and Senate this week. Trump has been facing increased political pressure in recent months, growing resistance from both sides of the aisle. And again, we have seen the president now taking to his social media account, Truth Social, and saying that he has signed the bill. We are awaiting any more information on whether that bill was signed in front of cameras or possibly if there were photographers in the Oval Office when this happened. But so far, all we have seen is this Truth Social post. But again, this all comes after a lengthy debate, after pressure from Republicans in the House and in the Senate, as well as Democrats in the House and Senate, all calling for the Epstein files to be released. There are also big questions on exactly what may be redacted when it comes to these files. The files that we know have been in the possession of the Department of Justice for quite some time. The Department of Justice saying that they had looked at the case and they were not proceeding with it because there was no new evidence months ago. Now they're saying that there has been new evidence that has come to light, but they have not really specified on what that is. It looks like we're looking at another Truth Social post, or this is the Truth Social post that was just posted. Jeffrey Epstein, who was charged by the Trump Justice Department in 2019, parentheses, not the Democrats, was a lifelong Democrat, donated thousands of dollars to Democrat politicians, and was deeply associated with many well-known Democrat figures, such as Bill Clinton, who traveled on his plane 26 times, Larry Summers, who just resigned from many boards, including Harvard, sleazebag political activist Reid Hoffman, Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries, who asked Epstein to donate to his campaign after Epstein was charged, Democrat Congresswoman Stacey Plaskett, and many others. Perhaps the truth about these Democrats and their association with Jeffrey Epstein will soon be revealed because I have just signed the bill to release the Epstein files. This is the president posting on Truth Social. He goes on to say, as everyone knows, I asked Speaker of the House Mike Johnson and Senate Majority Leader John Thune to pass the bill in the House and Senate, respectively. Because of this respect, the votes were there. Again, these are all things that we're reading right now as we get them from Truth Social. Truth Social is the president's social media platform. It's often the first place he goes to make announcements, bypassing the other social media accounts that the White House and the president has. And we are now seeing those trickle out across social media. But again, breaking news tonight, President Trump has signed the bill that just came to him that has to do with the Department of Justice releasing the Epstein files. Now, there are some caveats in the legislation that went to the president for his signature. We don't know if he used any line item vetoes, but we do know that some of those caveats were there to, as lawmakers said, protect some information from getting out that had to do with the victims of Jeffrey Epstein. But there are big questions tonight on whether some of those caveats or possibly a review by the Department of Justice could result in parts of the Jeffrey Epstein files being redacted. There are also questions over oversight. Who has oversight about those redactions? What will constitute classified information, and whether any of that may have to do with the President of the United States. But once again, we have breaking news tonight. President Donald Trump signing the bill to release the Epstein files. All of this is developing through the night. We are reaching out to several reporters on the Capitol Hill. We have Garrett Haake, I understand, who's just probably hearing about this news as well. I believe Garrett joins us from the phone. Garrett, shockwaves going out right now, but this is not unexpected. We heard the president say several times he was going to be signing this bill. We just didn't know about the timing of it. What's your reaction to this tonight?
Yeah, I mean, Gotti, I would say not unexpected since about Friday. But if you were to think back to where we were over the summer when the Justice Department first announced that there would be no release and the political backlash first began, we have come a very long way in the evolution of the thinking on this by President Trump. This signing statement attempts to rewrite the political history of this entire episode a little bit, with the president focusing on his 11th hour appeal to House Republicans at first to pass this bill. Then his comments really almost entirely referring to comments he made in the Oval Office on Monday, suggesting that Senate Republicans had signed this. He told me when I asked him about this that sure, he would sign it, suggesting this is something he has wanted all along. Now he's trying to turn the tables politically on Democrats, whom he blames for all of this, suggesting that they will, regret opening this Pandora's box, and that the contents of these documents or the way in which they might be perceived by the public will ultimately damage Democrats more than him. Gotti, I've been talking to people around the president about this. I spoke to a senior White House official about it today. He's been enormously frustrated by this whole episode. He views it as a huge distraction from what he believes are the achievements of the second term. He believes that congressional Republicans have been weak and stupid in the views of those around him, and occasionally from the president's own mouth, basically allowing this distraction to fester. He compares it to the Russia investigation that consumed so much oxygen during his first term. I think he and the White House hope that with this signing tonight that the pressure will be off of him. But the president has also acknowledged repeatedly in public, including as recently as yesterday, that for some people, including Republicans, nothing will ever be quite good enough. No amount of disclosure will be sufficient. There will never be complete trust in what the government puts out, and that the conspiracies surrounding Jeffrey Epstein will live on no matter what is released. And so I think I see in this long Truth Social post from the president acknowledging that he has signed this bill tonight elements of frustration, resignation, and an effort to capitalize politically on a moment that has been a long time coming, and now this sort of effort to pivot it to his own political advantage.
In that pivot, do you think that we will see him possibly assume a front and center role? I mean, in the past, it seems as though he's wanted to deflect attention from this, saying that, people don't care, people should move on. But if the DOJ is releasing these files, and there are the names of politicians, including Democrats and possibly Republicans in there, can you see him possibly holding events at the Oval Office and highlighting certain names here?
I think that's unlikely, but not impossible, and here's why. Donald Trump never cared about the Epstein files as much as some of the people around him did during the course of the campaign. This was never something he sort of intentionally campaigned to answer questions about it. He allowed others of his supporters to kind of run with the football on this issue. It's not something that I think personally excites him in the same way that talking about trade or even his own politically motivated campaigns against other individuals. This has never captured his imagination in the same way. Secondarily, if his Department of Justice and FBI are to be believed for what they said in July when they first said they would not be releasing these files, there is not information in these files sufficient to open criminal investigations into anyone. Remember, that was what the DOJ and the FBI said in that joint statement, explaining why they wouldn't be releasing this information. What is left, if not sufficient to open investigations criminally is likely to be simply embarrassing, possibly to him, possibly to some of these major Democratic figures. And so I think it's possible you might see the president use his social media account, make comments where possible to try to use whatever may come out here to score points to damage Democratic figures like the former Treasury Secretary Larry Summers, who's been caught up in the most recent disclosure from Epstein's estate. I think is a good example. But in terms of trying to take this into the political spotlight, I don't think it's on the list of the top 5 things the president most wants to talk about. And unless there is a political enemy specifically of his named in some particularly embarrassing way in whatever does ultimately come out, I just don't think it's his weapon of choice going forward either.
And if I understand this correctly, at this point, the 30-day timer kicks in, and the DOJ has, I believe, 30 days to release these files. Where does that all come from? Who's heading up the review of these files, and what could we see in the next month or so?
Yeah, that is a great question, and it's one that we don't have a totally clear answer to. Now, we know that the Attorney General, Pam Bondi, kind of put her at the center of this early in the Trump administration when she first claimed that the files were sitting on her desk and ready for release. You know, they obviously did in the Department of Justice some work in terms of organizing these things and redacting them to do the limited release that they did to a group of conservative influencers in the spring. So some of this work has already been done by different elements of the Justice Department. I think the White House will likely try to shift the focus of this to the DOJ, who is the keeper of all of this material, and sort of let this, wash their hands of it, let this be their problem to sort out what comes out and when. In terms of the type of documents in here, it's a tough question to answer because we really don't know what we don't know. We can speak broadly about some of the types of things that we may find out about. For example, electronic devices, hard drives seized by the FBI when Epstein was arrested back in 2019. Those contents have never seen the light of day. Those could be very interesting. Think about the information that became public from Jeffrey Epstein's estate in recent days of his various emails and correspondence. If there's more material like that, could be of great public interest. The other thing that our law enforcement experts here at NBC News have talked about that would be of great interest to them is something called FBI 302 forms. These are basically the intake forms, if you will, that an FBI agent might prepare if he or she brings you in for an interview. It's not a transcription. It's not the complete contents of your interview, but it might be, I, Agent Garrett, brought in, Gotti Schwartz today for an interview. We talked about this, this, and this. It doesn't necessarily include the follow-up. So this is the kind of thing that is not typically released for this reason, that it might be perceived as almost defamatory. If I tell an FBI agent I saw this, this, and this, but those things don't ultimately check out, if those are dead leads, that never comes public in a criminal case. That kind of information typically never sees the light of day. But a lot of that type of information still exists in a file like this. And so we might see leads that investigators pursued, things that they ultimately found not credible, but you might not be able to follow all of those pieces through the files. And so you're going to get little pops of investigative information along the way that could be very interesting, but also potentially, perceived as derogatory towards the people being investigated, even if they were later cleared. And the third thing that I think will be a lot of interest to people, Gotti, are a manner of communications, which is the internal communications at the DOJ and FBI about why they did what and when. This bill calls for those types of communications to be made public, which we almost never see in a federal criminal case. Why was this charging decision made or not? Why was this decision to interview this person made or unmade? The sausage making of a federal prosecution will be fascinating on its own, let alone considering the high stakes of the people and places involved.
We thank you for watching, and remember, stay updated on breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or watch live on our YouTube channel.